I've never given this talk in a church before. So I'm going to say it's not a religious talk. It does not belong in any religion. And also, I am not a professional. I did not go to college for grief. I wasn't schooled in grief, nor was I schooled in fear, anger, or joy. This is something that is carried into our lives. We might not know it's coming, but I will say when it does come, you know you're in a new place. So the talk is called Living After Loss, Grieving, Healing, and Connecting. And it's not a good title because it turns out that those of us who are healing are grieving. And those of us who are grieving are working towards our healing. But we're not actually healing because we're not sick. We're restoring ourselves back to something that we can use as the new me. And the connecting for me is through this journey process, how we connect outward, how we connect inward, how people support us, and how the community can be involved. And I will tell you, I did start in art school. I'm an architect. So I'm really interested in the creative responses that people have to grief. And you'll see examples throughout this talk. So, we have a definition of grief. So first of all, there's grief everywhere. But the grief I'm going to discuss today, I'm going to call deep grief. It is the loss of someone you loved. I know you've got a flat tire, a lot of grief over that. I know, there's other issues. But what I'm going to discuss here very specifically is somebody you loved. And that's where this talk goes. So grief is not a disease, and it's not a sign that you're not strong. It's a journey. And I'm only able to discuss this because I got on the highway. Before I was on the highway, I belonged to a group that I call the clueless group. Do you know those people? They have no idea what's going on. And they say things that maybe don't feel right. They're not mean, they're not bad people. They're clueless. But you actually maybe stepped into a different place. So, does anybody recognize this piece of art? You should, if you lived through the last century. It's Picasso's Weeping Woman. And it starts the first part of the talk, grieving. And the reason I put this up is I must have seen that a few times in art books. But until you're stuck in grief, you don't realize that that's an external version of a very internalized pain. And I think Picasso got it. He did this just after or before or after Guernica in 1937 during the bombings in Spain. And he understood that there was a massive grief in his country. But if you've lost someone, I will tell you that I had no idea how much pain you feel. And I had no idea that your heart would turn into a donut. That actually, people have different versions of this. But the pain of your heart to me was confusing because really grief maybe is being processed in your microprocessor up here, but somehow this organ takes a lot of the pain. And I had an individual grief therapist after her son died and a couples grief therapist. And the first question I said to the therapist is, why do I hurt so much? Do I have a room with people who've been through deep grief? Do I have a room with people who know the pain? It's extraordinary. But when I say no pain relief, that doesn't mean your doctor doesn't want to give you pills. I guarantee you go in, they have pills for you. But it's not actually a recommended way to walk through this. But the other big emotion I had, or the big sense I had, was I felt that somebody had dropped me into a Bavarian forest. That's where they were at the end of the Second World War. And I had no way out. I could not figure out in my life how to get out of grief. I wanted relief, and I tried everything. And I don't know if any of you worked your way through this, but if you called up a grief support group, they wouldn't take you for 6 months because they didn't want crying people for the whole meeting. They need places for people who are puddles. And those places are hard to find. I actually found a group that took me. But I really felt like, how do I get a passport out of here? How do I come through this? And so for me, finding relief was actually an enormous project. And I hit my grief right at the beginning of COVID. And the only thing I can say positive about that is if you have a mask on, nobody can see how miserable you are. I don't know where everybody else was, but for me, you're in total isolation, and if people see you, you're masked. So it was for me, it was a gift. But I had no idea. Now, I'm going to say there's kind of two kinds of grievers here. There's the fresh grievers and what I'm going to call the long-time grievers. Is there anyone in this group who is dealing with loss that's less than a year? Anyone? Okay, you are the fresh grievers. And I wouldn't recommend this particular book to you because I think it's a little too much like a textbook. It's not a textbook, it's a very thoughtful book, but it's written by a leading researcher in the field of clinical psychology and neurobiology. I probably read it at year 3. I'm at year 5 now. Her big thesis, you can read the whole book, but the big thesis is that every one of you sitting in these chairs knows who you are. You have a self-identity. You've spent your whole life determining who you are. You have a way that you live, and you have people who surround you who help self-define you. And the thesis of this book is, if you take one of those key people out of your self-identity, your picture collapses. You don't know who you are anymore. And your brain, I learned a new word at the beginning of all this, perseverate. Does everybody know the verb to perseverate? When you perseverate, this is when you keep doing this. Oh, I did what? You keep going over the same thing over and over again. You can't release it, which we do often when someone dies. We have guilt, we have anger, we have fear. But her thesis is, because that structural element left, the roof collapsed, you're in the rubble, and it takes a long time to rebuild something, and we're going to call this something the new you, because you're missing someone key who allowed you to be defined. And so it's all about the processing of the brain. And we don't usually, I don't love the word healing because I don't like the idea that you have a pathology. You do not have a pathology in grief. You are doing something incredibly natural and incredibly normal. And I have a little card over there that says, and you are not crazy, right? You're not. I got a parking ticket sort of at the beginning of grief because what was I thinking? And I wrote the judge and I told him I was in grief. And do you think he gave me an ounce of love? No, it didn't work. It's not a socially understood thing. Grief brain, you're kind of fogged out. Like in America, you're supposed to go back to work after day 3. Not a good idea to put that person back in charge of anything, because grief brain is the thing that you're doing. You can be quite stuck. So the grieving brain, I have a few copies of that book here, but I'm going to talk about this book here, which is written by Joanne Cacciatore. She has a doctorate in consulting and psychology, and she's worked with a lot of major grief trauma situations. But what's interesting is in Arizona, she teaches a class on grief and death to college students. Who is going to sign up for that? But she gave them a creative writing assignment. And I am going to, did I skip a page here? I'm going to read to you what this student wrote. I think it's outrageous. So she has a recipe, a student, a 22-year-old student, a recipe for raw grief. So stick with me. Some of this will make sense. She thinks the ingredients in the recipe are disbelief, reluctance to say goodbye, excruciating pain, brutal sadness, confusion, constant obsessing, we talked about anger, but you can substitute that with feeling misunderstood, agonizing guilt, embarrassment, loneliness, and a dash of untimeliness and needless. Now, how do you make that raw grief? You fill a large pot with tears. You use a mallet to pound your anger until tender. You spread pain in the bottom of the dish. You layer it with anger, guilt, and shame. You place it in the oven, and you bake it until loneliness turns to intense longing. Let it sit for a lifetime. Written by a college student. I don't think any of us could write this. But the next book is written by, I'm going to talk a lot about different books, about a woman who lives on Capitol Hill. She lost her son to an accident. And what's beautiful about it, I'm going to recommend it to our fresh grievers. I have copies over there. A little book of self-care for those who grieve. And I found this book in the Elliott Bay bookstore because I said, do you have bestsellers here? Just casually. And they had a wall. And they had a grief book on their best-selling wall. But what's beautiful about it, there's about 10 words per page. We love that. And for this particular page, transitional and sacred objects, I think everyone can be with me on this. Wear, carry, cradle, breathe your person's clothing, if you have it. His favorite shirt, the robe she wore, they are now transitional and sacred objects. They're your relic. Surround yourself with them if that helps. Sometimes it helps to wear the same clothes every day, lest to decide something constant and familiar. Allow yourself. And this book is all about allowing yourself. And she has been gifting these books to me, which I'm gifting to you. And I said to her, the only thing I disagree with is you can actually sleep in the clothing too. It's good for about 3 days, and then not a good idea. So these are books that talk about something that we know about, and maybe we haven't actually sought out a book. But this is a picture of what is thought about as the process for somebody with grief. You start off with a really big bag of rocks that you don't think you can carry. You end up with your grief case, which probably you can carry. And I'm at 5 years, not 10. I've met people at 10. You're still carrying it. It doesn't actually go away, but it's not a dominant accessory. And it doesn't take as much work to carry it. But this I got from our couples therapist, and a lot of people have seen this. And I think the top one is really important. People think that grief slowly gets smaller with time. Are you moving on? Is everything okay? You're good now, right? You're really strong. I mean, everybody wants you to stop grieving. It's a goal of the world around you. But in reality, I think this is a truth myself. Grief stays the same size, but slowly life begins to grow bigger around it. It's the same grief. And what is grief? As far as I'm concerned, grief is love. It's the only reason you're grieving for them. You're missing them. You love them. You want to honor them. You want them to still be in your life. That's why we grieve. And that is, Queen Elizabeth's quote is, grieving is the price we pay for love. I don't believe it, but that's what I've read. I didn't think she would say that. So now I'm going to show you just 3 responses to grief that are creative. In January, I was invited to a dance performance by the Spectrum Theater called Grief. Somebody said we should go, and I thought, that's the last thing I wanted to. But she bought tickets, so I ended up at the Rep. And I want you to know, if you go to an extraordinary performance, but it's called Grief, you might get 40 people in the room. It was the tiniest audience I'd ever seen in a theater in Seattle. But it was the Emmett Till murder reenacted by the mother's grief at the funeral. Now, I was born in 1954 in Canada, and he was killed in 1955 in the United States. So I missed this whole story. It didn't make it into my social studies, but I know about it now. And I did not know that the mother chose to have an open casket to a murdered 14-year-old, brutally murdered. And people say it was the beginning of the civil rights movement. It really was. And so her grief, it consisted of a singer and dancers, and it was a profound performance. Again, a creative response to something that we don't talk about and that doesn't get into the room. The second one are the ghost bikes. Do we remember the ghost bikes? We don't see them as much now. The movement started in 2003 in St. Louis, Missouri. Somebody saw a cyclist hit by a car and gone. And he didn't know how to deal with it. So he painted a bike white and chained it to a post and had a sign that said something like, "Oh, cyclist struck here." And in cities all over the country, volunteers did this. And in Seattle, in 2005, there were 40 ghost bikes put in our city. Anybody remember them? But it's a very personal response, also a community response. It was all volunteers to acknowledging this stuff. We probably need white cars on I-5, but nobody's come up with that yet. The last one is very personal to me. I have an identical twin sister, and I should be so lucky, right? But she's a quilter. So what did she do to express her grief? She took all of my son's denim clothing, and she made me a very heavy quilt that I sleep under. But she calls them spirit quilts. And I don't know if any of you did this, but in my family, when somebody passes, all the clothing is collected and something is made, and we carry that with us. So this was her personal response to grief. But the healing, kintsugi. Kintsugi? All right, who knows kintsugi? One guy, I got 2, 3, well, I have. Kintsugi is an ancient practice in Japan of putting pottery, broken pottery back together with lacquer and powdered gold, silver, or platinum. And when you put it back together, you see all the breakage, but it's considered more beautiful than the original vessel. And it's honoring the imperfection of the broken vessel. And by the way, we are the broken vessels. And kintsugi is a way of realizing that allowing our imperfections is part of our beauty. And this is a silly story, but I had a beautiful plate. The day I found out my son had died, somebody showed up with heart-shaped cookies. I put it on this plate that had something written on it. And every day I ate one of those cookies on that plate. And then, of course, one day my husband broke it. I was so pissed until I found out about kintsugi. And I let him put it back together, and I still use the plate. And I appreciate the fact that it's back together and that it's still part of my life. Now, if you've lived through grief, you're going to ask yourself this question: am I going to get better? And how do I know I'm getting better? The man who wrote this book, I have copies over there, it's called Coping with Grief, A Guide for the Bereaved Survivor. He has all of these things for you, and you get to the very end, and he has that question. And so I appreciated some of his answers, which he collected from people. One of them is, it doesn't hurt as much as it used to. Now, that's an acknowledgement that it still hurts. So I appreciated that. I'm not searching as often for that familiar face. And it's true, we slow down a little. But he's not making the statement that we've moved on and it's over. Holidays, birthdays, and anniversaries are a little easier. But the last one, it took me a while to get it. See if you get it. I've noticed there aren't as many idiots on the freeway. And so because it was COVID and I didn't go anywhere, I didn't get it. And then eventually I realized you're carrying so much anger that everybody's a jerk, right? So, but I think that's important to think about. Getting better is not a pure, you don't get to 10. You get somewhere, but you don't get a 10. Now, our grief counselor, I asked her about getting better. And this is what she said to me. She said, you will become whole again, but you will have a hole. And it will be like those trees with holes. So what did I do? I went home and I found all the pictures I could find of trees with holes because I wondered, what does that look like? And the only thing I can tell you that's sort of cool is inside those holes, furry little things live. So we should be happy. We have furry little things coming, I guess. But I think it's a good thing to realize we find some level of wholeness, but we'll always carry the whole. Now, I'm not a journaler. You wouldn't say that Pamela has great self-introspection. It's not something I've spent my life doing, but as soon as I hit full 60-mile-an-hour grief, I got a journal. My sister had brought these back from Japan. I liked the fact it said life on it. And the first day I wrote 10 pages in a journal, and it became a practice. Again, just looking for relief. But I thought it was interesting that I found this page. I don't read these journals, and I circled it. Progress. Has the healing begun? And the other day I read the top of it, and I thought, doesn't sound like it, girl. It's something you ask yourself. If you've been a puddle, I really thought I was a puddle on the floor. The question is, am I standing up yet? And I will tell you, I asked my therapist, why do we journal? She didn't have a great answer, but I came to the conclusion, it's part of that processing. It's part of our mind going through this thing over and over again. So did anyone here start a journal or keeping a journal or going through any of this by writing? We have a writer here. We have a writer there. It's one of the ways we can process. Oh, by the way, and here I think this is brilliant. It's my invention. You take if you're in grief and you take a calendar, this is month 4. I don't know what it would have looked like month 1. I only came up with this later. But I got a calendar and I said, every day that's a blackout. I can't function, I can't get out of a chair, it's black. And then the yellow is sort of my better days, but the blue is I'm sad. But again, I'm okay. And if you look at this at month 4 and my son's birthday, you look at it, it's not okay the day before, it's May 1, not okay, it's black that night, but I got through the day, which they often say, these days that look like you can't get through them, they actually are less worse than you anticipate. Would anybody agree with this calendar as an experience? Would anybody have more black days than me right now? There you can. I'd say you're all doing very well because you're sitting here. And in fact, the first time I saw my grief therapist and I showed up, opened the door, she said, congratulations. You got here at 2 o'clock, your appointment's at 2 o'clock. Most grievers don't even get to my door. So this is an accomplishment, being able to be here. So I'm just saying, I would recommend it if you knew someone who wanted a way to see what was going on. Now, that looks like a mailbox, doesn't it? This is another one of these creative projects. It looks like a mailbox. I want you to know it's 7.5 feet tall. That means it's about this big, right? And it's an art project by a woman named Danielle Ciano. It's metal, and it has a slot right on this side that says Letters of Grief. And on the other side, it has a slot that says letters of gratitude. And then in the middle, you can almost see it. There's a plexi or glass panels. And this was a grief art project that was gifted to the community of Santa Barbara after, in what year? 2018, they had the Montecito mudslides and fires, and they lost 23 people in their community. But the idea of grief and gratitude actually go together. We're only involved with these people that we care about because of what they gave us. They gave us something. And so this mailbox was a place for you to think about your grief and your gratitude. And then they have scheduled readings with the equivalent of Hollywood actors. They're probably all unemployed. And you can come and listen to the letters being read. And the concept around this is the sharing. The sharing is helping with the healing and listening to other people's stories. But I have three things that are sort of connected in an interesting way. The next creative project is a woman in Los Angeles, the Postal Service for the Dead. You've never heard of it, right? But it's an address. You can find it online. She's in LA. And she invites you to write a grief letter. I couldn't change the type here, but I'm going to read it to you. You send a letter to the address, and you put nothing on the back. It means you wrote it. You needed to send it out, but you don't want them to read it. The next one, you put a heart on it. Her team gets to read it, but they don't want it published. The third one, you put a star on it. You want the team to read it and share it. She has an Instagram account where you can read these things. And you say to yourself, well, why would I use a postal service to the dead? But you know, if you go through therapy or you have a grief support group, that they talk about the idea of writing a letter to the person you loved. And it's actually a very beautiful thing to do, but what do you do with the letter? Well, you send it right there. And I'm going to tell you something I got from a writing, that grief writing thing is what's much, much harder, and I don't think any of you are going to do it, is to have the dead person write you a letter. With you write it, the letter from the person you loved. It's probably the most painful thing I've ever done. And I've never read it again. I'm not going to go there. But this is what's interesting. Another person who lost her father wanted to know how she could send her father a card that made sense for his birthday. So here it is. You aren't here to blow out your candles, but I'll light them for you. Happy birthday. Mom, I never said thank you enough. She created something called the Greeting Grief Card Company, the Greeting Grief. So the day I went to find these cards, because she mailed them, I looked up Greeting Grief cards, and I got to Hallmark. You have to flip the words. We're not looking for Hallmark cards, but think about it. You get these cards, and then you send them to the Postal Service of the Dead, and you're all done. All right, it's an idea. All right, nobody's going there. But I had some of those cards, but they got picked up at on some of my, I do a resource table, and you probably already noticed we give away books. We give them to you. So I'm going to talk about the connecting both outward and inward, and I'm going to ask you, what is that a picture of? They're rose petals that fell on the ground, little baby rose petals. And the reason I took the photo, I was gardening as part of my grief therapy. And I thought, wow, is that why we love roses? They're actually hearts. Did we ever see that before? I hadn't, and that was on the ground right by the rose bush. So I'm going to reference this book. I was given 10 copies by the author, Colin Campbell, Working Through Profound Loss with Hope and Purpose. He and his wife in a car, T-boned. Their only children both died behind them. And so what's interesting, it's a book that would mean an awful lot to people lost all of their children. But if you look at his titles, we have fear, pain, denial, guilt, rage, despair. I read the whole thing. I thought there was very quiet anger through the whole book, which I thought came with his own experience. I'm hoping I don't have quiet anger. But I saved this from the book because I wanted to share it with you. It was the thing that stuck to me the most. His wife was Jewish. They had a shiva. But at the funeral in the synagogue, the rabbi talked about a story of Rabbi Akiva ends up in a shipwreck in a storm. And he grabs onto a plank, and he somehow rides out the storm on the waves. And people said, like, how did you survive? And he said, I held on as the waves crashed over me. So this is what the rabbi said to them. And I thought, good. Get your ministers to do this. Gail and Colin, if you can, take a look around the room today. I know everything is shattered for you, but there are hundreds and hundreds of planks floating by you. Your family, your friends, your community, we're all here for you to grab us and hold on. We promise we will do our best to help you catch your breath as each wave passes over you. And so he goes on to say, I learned to appreciate those planks. I learned to cling to others in my time of need. Of course, you don't cling to the clueless people. That doesn't work. They don't know what's going on. But food, have you guys figured out that food is a great way to connect to the person you loved? My son loved cheesecake. What do I make on his birthday? Cheesecake. Does anybody else here make food that reminds you or connects you to the person you loved? I'm seeing some nodding. Okay, tell me one thing someone makes here. What do you make? Ice cream? Vanilla. Oh, wow. What else? Cherry. Do you make cherry pies? Can I come? Okay. I don't make pie. That's very cool. So now I'm going to tell you a story. How many people here have the joy of cooking? And I'm going to say you have that copy, right? That's the 1975, but they look like that. We don't know this, but Irma Rombauer was a socialite in St. Louis, Missouri. Her husband was a lawyer and a politician, and they say she wasn't a great cook, but she had a vivacious personality. And right after the stock market crashed in 1929, 3 months later, her husband, who dealt with depression, committed, I don't use that word, took his life by suicide. And there she is. She's a woman in her 50s, some savings, walking into the worst economic depression the country's never ever seen. And what does everybody say? Oh, you got to do something to stay busy. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Do something to stay busy? I hope you're staying busy. I gardened. That's how I did it. So she announced she was going to write a cookbook. People were very surprised because she wasn't, but she collected everybody's recipes and tested them and went down the street and got the local printer 3 blocks away to print 3,500 copies, which sold out. Now, why am I telling this story? Because that's the cover of the first 1931 edition. Do we think she's slaying the grief dragon? I think she's slaying the grief dragon. I mean, what is she doing? Why is that the cover of the book? But the other thing about it that's so interesting is you're in grief and you use the word joy for the title of your book. And do you know why the book was so popular? This is off topic. Because the title was a compilation of reliable recipes with a casual culinary chat. And nobody had written a cookbook before that was like personalized. Like, this is what we always made for Aunt Jane's 30th anniversary party. That made it charming. And of course, the book went on. It's now sold a mere 20 million copies. But you did not know that she was the widow. She was a survivor of suicide. Did anybody hear it now? Somebody here is. How did you know?
So, actually, my husband lost his brother 2 years ago.
Yes.
And they really connected over cooking. My brother-in-law loved to cook. And so cooking was a real theme in my husband's remarks at his brother's
Yeah.
memorial service. And he researched this. And I'm from St. Louis as well.
Oh, well, then say this is
shared some of the story.
right. Well, I was fascinated. It came up in a conversation. I had to learn more. Before I die wall, there's about 5,000 of these around the world now, but it all started 14 years ago in New Orleans. And some woman lost a woman in her life that she considered her mother, and she ended up plastering plywood on an abandoned building, painting it black, and having a stencil that said, "Before I die." And this is quite extraordinary. I think it was hours later that it was filled by people coming by. And if you look at it carefully, some of it is very light and silly, and some of it is very profound. Somebody wants to fart in the arms of Angelina Jolie. That somebody else wants to marry Trudy, and I hope that person did. Someone else, of course, wants to win the lottery. But the reason this wall was so profound was it gives everybody the opportunity to stop and think. I don't even think I can do it. It's a one thing. But the woman who invented or started this gets very annoyed because some communities will change the stencil to, before I leave, I'd like, they euphemize it. But she feels it should be extremely direct. But it's, again, in her case, it's her creative response to grief, and she's connecting to her community in a very big way. I know no one knows about the survivor tree. When I found out about this is a story of hope, and we all need hope. In fact, I have several four-letter words that I really like. I love love, and I love hope, and I like to use those words a lot. The survivor tree, the World Trade Center crashed. They both came down. There was massive rubble. They cleaned up all the rubble, and in the little plaza behind, they found a tiny pear tree that was broken and burnt underneath everything. And somebody dug it up. They took it to the New York City Parks Department, and they brought it back to life. And eventually brought it back to life enough that this actually is the survivor tree. But it's much more than that. They graft branches off this tree, and they make more survivor trees. And every year they give 3 to communities in grief who have lived with extraordinary trauma. It could be a school shooting, could be a tornado. There are many versions of communities that are hurting. And so the survivor tree brings hope around the world. Does everybody think that's as beautiful as I think it is? And we love pear trees in blossom. I mean, it's already a beautiful thing. So I'm showing that to you because it's another way that the community gets engaged in hope and grief. Oh, and here I'm in the story now. So Dabney mentioned that we have book boxes, and we have them. You can see there's a little necklace of boxes going from Edmonds down to SeaTac over to Vashon. And this particular book box is one of our mama book boxes. We built 5 of these. They're too big. Nobody wants to manage them. We then built the baby ones. We have both right now. But we did this to make an amenity free to people in grief. And I have a big thing about free. I work as a volunteer. Everybody who helps me is a volunteer. Everything in that book box was donated. The lumber, the post, the aluminum, the paint, the signage. And how do you get everybody engaged? When I go to your lumber yard and I ask you for $900 worth of plywood, and you give me that look like, "Hey, lady," and I say, "But I have no currency but love, but it's right here in this box of homemade cookies," you go, "Yeah, sure, and do you need the post too?" It works every time. You have to show up with love, and you have to make the love. And I actually had some volunteer bakers for a while, but they kind of faded out. And next week, I'm doing some more baking. But it works. You bring everybody cookies. But she said something about finding grief at the library. So if you wanted a book on grief, you would have to know the Dewey Decimal number. and it's under differential and developmental psychology. And in fact, I did find grief books. I found over 1,000, but the first 2 were thrillers and mysteries. I knew I was in the wrong place. I did need bereavement. But what we discovered was nobody had really parsed it out. And if I brought any of you into our library, which is full of books in my basement, my poor husband, this was not his favorite project. If I brought you in and said, hey, take a book, you would wipe out. But if you saw where the book was for the bereaved spouse or the bereaved parent or a book on suicide, you could find a book. So we decided we would parse out the idea of what grievers needed, and we came up with general grief books. They have purple dots. They're over there. I brought mostly purple dots. Bereaved parent, bereaved spouse, bereaved youth, bereaved sibling, people who've lost a parent. Medical and type of death includes cancer and suicide and car accidents. And then the spiritual religious actually have silver dots, which your printer can't do. But there are lots of books that are both religious and afterlife and mediums and rituals. So we decided we'd buy these books and we'd organize them. So that was the project, and all of this got worked out with a University of Washington library student. I know nothing about libraries. In fact, I could make a confession right here, right now. I'm a book nibbler. I'm not actually a book reader. I only read books when I couldn't get out of a chair, and that was 5 years ago. I've read most of the books that I brought to you, but I can't say I've read all of them, and nor do I want to. But we did something else. We created 2 more ways of helping grievers, and it's online, and you can find it, and you can actually text it over to someone. This was another brilliant idea of mine. We created something called Easy Reads, which was really hard to do, but we read books, and we found chunks of books to put on our website so you don't have to read a book. They're 3 to 6 minute reads, and that, by the way, is about the brain capacity of your overworked memory banks. So 3 to 6 minute reads, and the only reason it was hard to do is nobody ever answers your request for permission. Or if they do, they ask for money, and then you say, we give it away, we're asking you to give it to us. So Easy Reads is, I would say, at a 50% success right now, but we have something called, grief support for me. I think grief support for others is very useful. If you go in there and your friend says, I don't know what to do, Barbara just lost her mother, take a look at that. Grief support for men, we do have a few things there. So Easy Reads is mostly done, but a library student, I get a library student once a year through their capstone program, did something called Global that I think is very cool. It's a similar list as this, a similar set of categories, but she found books that met each category. And then there's something called WorldCat. You're all librarians, you know WorldCat? It's the world catalog of books, and some nerd on the planet got 10,000 public libraries to send in all their titles, amassed it. It's a 2 billion title database. And that means that if we let you know under parent laws, these are 10 books that you might want to get from your library, you can put in your zip code in South Africa. They don't have it. In Wellington, they definitely don't have it. Wellington, New Zealand, or Amsterdam, and you can find out which books are in your public library. But sometimes they're in Rotterdam and not Amsterdam. But we did this because my goal was to never ask a griever for anything. So if I wanted to recommend a book, I wanted you to be able to find it. And, get this, so we have that. And this year, we chose to have a whole collection made. I know there's no one here. Do you speak Mandarin? No, I don't think so. We did a whole collection of books in Mandarin, and next year we're doing a collection of books in Spanish. And it's an extraordinary project, and it will be published in Chinese newspapers. So Flower Connection, gardeners here? Gardeners. Well, I want you to know the day I found out that my son died, I went right to Swanson's, And I bought every bleeding heart plant they had. They come in 5 colors, in case you haven't bought all the bleeding heart plants at your nursery. And then the next year I got the forget-me-nots. They're basically weeds, but they're the prettiest weeds you've ever planted. And you put them in your garden because you want a garden that's a renewal part of your life, but also that brings great memories. Lilies, of course, are Easter, resurrection. We know lilies. But I plant sunflowers, and I spell them S-O-N flowers, and I make sunflower bouquets. I have a lot of volunteers. I have so many sunflowers. I have volunteers, and I give them away. But also birth flowers. My son's birth flower is the lily of the valley, a flower my husband, not my husband, my father hated, but they're definitely in my garden. So these are ways of putting tiny touches into your life about the person that you loved. And that's what we want to do. That's the only reason we're grieving, is we're thinking about them. We're missing them. We want to connect with them. There are 2 copies of this book here. They were gifted to us by the author. After Your Person Dies, Affirmations for Grief, Making Meaning, and Going On. She illustrated the whole book. She self-published it. She has a PhD in psychology. She lost her father and her husband in 3 months. But what I thought was so beautiful about the book, my husband didn't like that. She has it's easy to read. It's big type. She has 1 page on the compost heap. And I said, I thought it was such a great quote. If you're a gardener, you'll get this. She considers the compost heap to be really messy, but fertile. And she's letting us know that's our grief. It's the messiest thing we've ever dealt with, but there's something in there that we can grow. So it's a beautiful, each thing is on 1 page. But we're talking again about connecting to the person we loved. And I'm not doing mediums. Somebody asked me not to do mediums the last time I did a talk, although some of us know mediums, because they said that grievers are very vulnerable, and I don't want anyone to be scammed by a medium. So I'm not doing mediums, but I'm telling this story. So she wanted butterflies to come out on the 1st anniversary of her husband's death, which we call a thaniversary based on Thanatos. So she got the little worms, the little monarch worms, and they fed them the milkweed, and they cleaned the frass for weeks. And then the little worms started making cocoons, and the concept was they were all going to break out on his birthday. And that was her way of being with her husband. Well, it turned out that's not what happened. They weren't going for the plan. They ended up just being cocoons on his birthday, and she had to think about it, and these were some of the thoughts she had. Number 1 is, it turns out the plan is no longer the plan. That's what you figure out. The plan is a moving target. But secondly, she looked at the cocoons, and they were all wiggling into little J's. And her husband's name was Jonathan. And she thought, well, something's going on here. I like that. And then a monarch flew in and landed on her son's T-shirt, and her husband's last name was Rex. And she just thought the whole thing completed itself. And I'm telling you this story because it's about trying to connect to someone you loved, and it's also about raising butterflies. We all want to do that, right? No. The frass is the thing that disturbs me. This book, I did not buy you a copy for my table because for some reason it's $20 right now, even used, so I didn't buy it. Laura Lynn Jackson do you know the difference between a psychic and a medium? A psychic can find your keys, and a medium will talk to your dead person. The medium goes through the veil, but the psychic's going to tell you, you should take that job. One is sort of more of a mystical counselor. So I think she's a medium, but she writes a book about God winks. Do we know that word, God winks? It's the synchronicity that you feel with the person you're missing. So your son's favorite song was, I Want to Hold Your Hand. All right, I made it up. And you're thinking about your son, you get into your car, you turn it on, and there it is. And it's called the God wink. There's also this thing about white feathers. I actually collect white feathers. It's considered to be a sign from the person that you've lost. But I have a friend who has chickens, and she said, I'm not collecting white feathers. And it's also true when you stuff your pillows in your guest room. I mean, you fluff them up, you get a few too many white feathers. So it's things like other people will tell you they're always finding dimes. And they see that as it's called the God wink, but they see it as a way that the person who you are missing is still with you. They're reaching out, they're leaving a little sign. And this is what she says in the book. The signs give meaning and connection in ways that make the grief easier to bear. Helps you carry your loss with more grace and less fear. It softens the need to have our life plan go as planned, which we already found out it's not going to do for us, right? So, the wind phone. Does everyone know about the wind phone? I'm going to do the backstory quickly, but then I'm going to tell you something exciting. So Itaru Sasaki in Northeast Japan lost his cousin to cancer, and he wanted to talk to his cousin. The Japanese are not very effusive or emotional, so he put a phone booth in his backyard, and he'd go out and he'd use this vintage phone with the dial, and he would call his cousin, and it's called Kaze no Denwa. Kaze is the wind, and Denwa is the phone. So that was what he called it. And it was his very personal, intimate thing. And then the next year, he did this in 2010, 2011, they had the earthquake and the tsunami. 15,000 members of his community died. And his phone booth washed back in, because most things did. He put the phone booth back in his garden, he opened the garden gate, and he let the world in. And they say, I can't do the math on this, it doesn't seem right, 30,000 people have visited that wind phone in the last 14 years. But do the math, that's a lot each day. So, and there's an NPR thing about, you can listen to, you can look it up on NPR. So I have been fascinated by the idea that you could get a phone and you could get on it, you could talk to the person you were missing. So I told my volunteer carpenter about this, who built all of our smaller boxes. This is a cemetery in Ballard called Crown Hill Cemetery. It is probably the funkiest cemetery in the city. I got a grave there for my son because I knew I could buy the groceries and then visit him and then go home. So I thought it should be near my house. And they have amazing trees. And we have a grievers library there. We asked permission to put a wind phone there. And I call this Tolkien's wind phone. Doesn't it look like Lord of the Rings? Now you see that little wall phone there? Came from Dabney's basement. Dabney donated that wall phone. Dabney's part of this. But I have to tell you that I went. You can go. And that's a bar stool. It swings around. You can be on the phone and look out. It's built with love. This is a total construct of love. And he did it totally with repurposed and recycled materials. And it's the only one in Seattle. That's what makes it so exciting. But the other side of the story is, I didn't actually tell you, when we put these grievers book boxes up around town, they were radioactive. And that is a metaphor for nobody wanted one near anything. They didn't want it near their nonprofit. I went to the city of Seattle, and I had picked 5 parks that were nicely separated, 5 community centers with parks, and asked to put them in front. And I went through the parks department, the legal department, and the city hall. And the thing was, they are inappropriate for the public. So I went through, it took a year to get the first grievers box cited. And then some of my grievers book boxes are extremely slow. Like business at the cemetery is the slowest. I just want you to know, there aren't that many people going. The best is Edmonds on the main street. But the thing was, it was so much work in 4 years to get 8 book boxes cited in our community that when I thought about the wind phones, people said, oh, you should put one on a cliff, you should put one in a garden. I knew it would take forever. So I came up with another, what I thought was a brilliant idea. You have to spare me, right? I have to feel good about something. I came up with a wind phone lending library. And I got 4 going already. I was just at a grief conference. It's a backpack with a tag. On the back it says which bereavement organization owns it. And inside of it is a wind phone. And you get to take it where you want. If you want to go sit at your mother's grave, that's where it goes. If you want to sit on the beach on a log. And so we've just distributed 2 of these to a widow group and 2 of these to a bereaved parent group. And I'm just going to let you know, I'm looking for 10 more vintage rotary phones. And I try to get everything donated. So I'm still on that. And I'm talking to historical societies because they have too much stuff in their archives. I may be able to succeed, but Dabney showed up with a wall phone, and we said, we got to put it in that. So I wanted you to know this was part of my plan for us to connect to the person that we really miss. That's the only reason you're here, by the way. No one came here because they were interested in grief. You came here because you're in grief. So that is why these wind phones. Oh, and so I want to do 10 more. And Jansport gave me 10 backpacks. They just showed up again. How do you do that? You call them up and you say, will you give me 10 backpacks? It's amazing. Did you know all you have to do is ask and the universe will give it to you? So sitting at your seat is a pen and a piece of paper. And why did I put those on your chair? I put them on your chair because, these are my 3 mantras. You're not alone. You will survive this. And you are not crazy. I would like everyone to write one thing on that card. And if you already wrote on the card, grab another one. There's empty ones in front of you. I would like everyone to write this one thing. I want you to write at the top spouse loss, child loss, something, just a definer, not your name. And then write down one thing that you are able to do that gives you comfort. I'm really interested. What do people do? And I'm not going to give you any clues. You're all going to have a different answer. But something you do that when you do it, it makes you feel better. And everybody has a different answer. But if you don't mind writing it down, I'll never know you wrote it, by the way. I'm just going to collect these, and we're going to look at a few of them because we can share these ideas. So while you're writing, I'm going to say something to you. That story about crashing over the planks, over his head and holding onto the planks, when you go to the website for the Grievers Library, you're going to discover on the first page there's sort of a tsunami wave. And that, for me, was the experience of the grief trigger. Was, you think you're doing okay, and then it just comes right over you. And people have said to me, oh, it's a very pretty website. And my comment is to myself is, okay, they haven't met grief. Because anyone who meets grief doesn't say that. They go, oh, that's the wave. Like it's almost code for I've been there. So I did all the illustrations on the website, and I built the website, and I made it as non-corporate as I could, because I didn't want you to look at what looks like a national nonprofit. We know what they look like. They're all done with a template. The website is a little on the funky side, but on purpose. It's meant to be friendly. Everybody ready to give me something? Do I have a crowd here of things? Thank you for sharing that. And she's giving me back my pen. That's nice. Yep. I'm going to take that. Hey, thank you. At some point, I'm going to see how many I can collect to see if there's a common theme that I can use to try and help people. Oh, and I got the pen. Hey, thank you. I'll pick up the pens as well. All right, I'm coming. By the way, I'm very thankful you showed up. I didn't know who would show up for a talk on grief. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. Are we done? Do we have the cards shown up? And there's one more. That's all right. She's writing an essay. That's fine. Go for it. I'm going to look at one. Yep, I go for this one. Plant flowers in my yard. She loved. Beautiful lettering. Plant flowers in my yard she loved. Yes, I get that. I'm a gardener. Well, actually, the first summer after my son died, my sister moved out because of COVID, and I took over her garden. I put in over 100 plants, several courtyards, and several paths. And then I'll say this without swearing, but I'd like to swear. And then she sold the house. It's like, and you know what I did? I went and took the plants back. I thought, oh, here's something. The person who wrote this, boy, do I get this, and I don't know who wrote it. I'm not in grief, yet I'm considering an inevitable future. I have a husband with 4th stage cancer, and we were at a blood transfusion this morning. And I thought I could read books on anticipatory grief. I just have to tell you, you can't read books on anticipatory grief when you're in anticipatory grief. Somebody has a parent loss and they cry. This is really important to know, is that people don't want to bring up your loved one because they think they're going to make you cry. They don't actually understand. You want to cry, and they're not making you cry. That's your being. That's who you are. And they're so afraid of seeing your emotion. But in fact, crying is a wonderful healing process. And I don't know, we don't see people cry very often, do we? And I mean, every so often I just burst into tears. Somebody lost a sibling. They read hard books and learn something new every day. That's an interesting approach. All right, I'm going to pick another one. Somebody lost a parent. Oh, no, we did that one. I lost my parent. I hug a stuffed animal. I hide under the blanket, and I eat ice cream. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. I learned that my to be and with family goes, I learned that my something is around and with family gone before. I know I will see my son and all my family gone before. It helps me to go to others who've lost a loved one. Have you figured out that people who are in grief are kind of decent to hang out with? It's because they know to give them support and hope they will see their loved ones again. I'm going to put this down. I'm going to tell you that there are books about this as well. I think it's one called The Sixth, David Kessler wrote it, The Sixth Meaning, The Sixth, The Sixth Stage. So Kubler-Ross came up with 5, and he thought the last one was meaning. And I have not read the book. I haven't done it yet because, there's something really weird about this business. So many people make it a profession. They go through horrible grief, and now it's a profession, and that's how they have to make a living. They have to write books and all this. And that's the last thing I want to do is make this a profession. But I will tell you, the last group that I met with, a lot of people said service. Volunteering and service was their way of coping with grief. Now, some of you need to leave. If anyone wants to say anything or talk, let's do it. Does anyone have a question for me? Remember, I don't have a PhD in this. I just have lived experience as you have as well. Anybody have a comment? And by the way, I'm going over to that book table. I want you to take the blue book. She did. You took the book. Yeah, you took the book I wanted you to have. Yeah, I want that to go to you. Yes.
I've read the book that you had up there, The Signs.
Yes. Yeah, I read it too.
Opens your eyes to things. It's like, oh my gosh, I just saw such and such.
Yeah, I wish that was affordable. Our library buys books for $6 or less, and they're all used. So we don't have a budget to buy new books or good books. So what happens is some people go on Amazon and they order 10 copies and ship them to us, or authors will send them to us. So that's how we get the best books. But we're maybe getting a grant from BECU, maybe. Yeah, we're a semifinalist for an award. It's competitive. And with that money, we're going to buy better books for everybody, including you. So do you want to meet me at the table? If anybody would like to know anything else?
Thank you.
No, thank you.